Have you ever felt that something essential is missing in your spiritual life, even after years of devoted religious practice? That unsettling sense that despite all the prayers, all the rituals, all the sermons you've heard, there's a deeper truth still waiting to be discovered, something that traditional religion somehow cannot quite reach? If you're experiencing this right now, I want you to know something profound. You're not losing your faith. You're awakening to something far greater. This restlessness, this divine discontent, is actually your soul's way of telling you that it's ready to move beyond secondhand knowledge and into direct experience. It's ready to discover where God truly resides. But before we dive deeper into this revelation, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our future videos. Now here's the question that changes everything. What if the Christ you've been taught to worship from a distance is actually the very essence of who you are? What if everything you've been searching for outside yourself, in churches, in scriptures, in the heavens above, has been residing within you all along, closer than your own breath, more intimate than your heartbeat? For centuries, humanity has been conditioned to believe that Christ is exclusively the historical figure of Jesus who walked the earth 2,000 years ago. We've been taught to look backward to Galilee, to look upward to heaven, to look anywhere except the one place where the divine presence actually dwells. Has this ever happened to you, praying earnestly to a God you imagined somewhere out there, feeling the distance, wondering why your prayers seem to echo in an empty void? Stay with me until the end of this video, because what you're about to discover might completely transform your understanding of spirituality, of Christ, and most importantly, of yourself. The truth that has been hidden in plain sight is this: Christ is not a person to be worshipped. Christ is a state of divine consciousness, a living presence that expresses itself through every awakened human being. It's the infinite, omnipresent reality that cannot possibly be confined to one man, one moment in history, or one religious tradition. Christ is the eternal light, illuminating every soul that enters this world, and that includes you. Think about it for a moment. When Jesus spoke the words, "I am," do you think he was referring to his human personality, to the carpenter's son from Nazareth? Or was he speaking from something infinitely deeper, something universal, something that transcends time and form? He was revealing the divine identity that lives as the core of all consciousness, the very same identity that exists within you right now as you watch this video. This isn't blasphemy. This isn't diminishing Jesus. This is actually understanding what Jesus truly came to reveal. He didn't come to be worshipped as separate from you. He came as a living demonstration of what you are in your deepest essence. And when you begin to grasp this truth, when you start to recognize that the I am that Jesus spoke from is the same I am that is aware right now through your eyes, everything changes. The question isn't where is God anymore. The question becomes, who is the I that is asking? And this is where the most profound shift in human consciousness begins to take place. You see, there's something absolutely revolutionary hidden in the simple word I that most people never notice. Every single day you wake up and say, "I'm awake." You look in the mirror and say, "I see myself." You feel emotions and say, "I am happy" or "I am sad." But have you ever stopped to ask, who is this I that is aware of all these experiences? What is this consciousness that exists before you attach any label, any identity, any story to it? This is precisely what Jesus understood and lived from, a dimension of identity that transcends the personal, that exists beyond the boundaries of individual personality. When he declared, "I am the light of the world," or "I am the way, the truth, and the life," he wasn't making an egotistical claim about a man named Jesus from Nazareth. He was speaking from the eternal I am, the infinite consciousness that is, the very substance of existence itself. He was revealing the divine identity that breathes your breath right now, that beats your heart as you listen to these words, that thinks your thoughts and experiences your life. This isn't just beautiful poetry or mystical language. This is the actual truth of what you are beneath the surface level of personality, memory, and conditioning. The Christ isn't something Jesus possessed exclusively. The Christ is the living presence of God expressing itself as individual consciousness, and that includes your consciousness. It's the eternal self that was never born and will never die, the divine spark that religions throughout history have tried to describe but often ended up obscuring through doctrine and dogma. If this resonates deeply with you, subscribe to this channel. We're exploring consciousness and truth in ways that go beyond surface-level spirituality, and I don't want you to miss what's coming. Now here's where the most significant transformation in understanding needs to happen. For 2,000 years, humanity made a sincere but critical mistake. We did what the human mind naturally does when confronted with something beyond its comprehension. We personalized it. We localized it. We confined it to a single historical figure. We took the infinite principle that Jesus embodied and reduced it to the biography of one man. We built monuments, institutions, and entire systems designed to worship Jesus from a comfortable distance, rather than doing the more challenging work of recognizing the very same consciousness within ourselves. This wasn't done with malicious intent. This was simply the human journey unfolding. When a revelation of this magnitude enters the world, the mind seeks to grasp it, to make it manageable, to turn it into something it can understand and control. And so the living Christ, this dynamic, universal presence, became veiled behind stained glass windows and theological debates. The message became secondary to the messenger. The principle was overshadowed by the person. And slowly, what began as a direct revelation about the divine nature of all consciousness became a religion about believing the right things about a man who lived long ago. The impact of this shift cannot be overstated. When you worship Christ as exclusively belonging to Jesus, you automatically create separation. You place the divine over there, while you remain over here, forever seeking, forever hoping, forever feeling incomplete. But when you begin to recognize that the I am Jesus spoke from is the same I am that is conscious within you right now, everything changes. The journey from separation to unity, from seeking to being, from belief to direct experience. This is the transformation that's been waiting to unfold in human consciousness for millennia. Now I want to go even deeper into this understanding, because recognizing the Christ within isn't just an intellectual concept. It's a lived reality that changes how you experience every moment of existence. But first, write in the comments, I recognize the I am within me, because declaring this truth begins to activate the very awareness we're discussing here. So let's unpack something that might completely shift your entire perspective on existence itself. When Jesus made that audacious statement, before Abraham was, I am, he wasn't just making a claim about his personal timeline. He was revealing something about the nature of consciousness that transcends all concepts of time, history, and individual identity. Think about the precision of his words for a moment. He didn't say, before Abraham was, I was, past tense, as if describing his own history. He said, I am, present tense, eternal, unchanging, existing beyond the limitations of linear time. This is the hidden truth that changes everything. The I am that Jesus spoke from isn't a possession, isn't an achievement, isn't something that belongs to one person or one moment in history. It's the eternal divine identity that is the very substance and foundation of all existence. It existed before Abraham, before Moses, before the stars were formed, before time itself began. And here's what most people miss. This exact same I am presence is what you're experiencing right now when you have the simple awareness of being conscious, of existing, of saying, I am. The only difference between your experience and Jesus's experience isn't in the nature of this presence. It's in the degree of recognition. Jesus lived with full awareness that the I am speaking through him was the infinite consciousness of God itself. Most people live their entire lives identifying exclusively with their personality, their history, their body, their thoughts, never recognizing the eternal presence that animates all of it. It's like spending your whole life believing you're the costume you're wearing without ever realizing there's someone wearing the costume. Now, this understanding didn't disappear after Jesus. Throughout history, certain individuals have stumbled upon this same revelation through their own journey of inner discovery. Smith Wigglesworth was one of those rare souls who refused to settle for second-hand knowledge about God. He wasn't interested in theological debates or academic theories about spirituality. He wanted direct experience, living reality, the actual presence of the divine expressing itself through his own being. What Wigglesworth discovered through years of deep contemplation and inner listening was revolutionary in its simplicity. He realized that the Christ isn't some quality you need to develop, some spiritual attribute you need to acquire through practices and disciplines. The Christ is the invisible presence of God that is already expressing as your individual being right now. It's the spiritual identity that exists exactly where you think your personal self resides. You don't need to become it. You need to recognize that it's already what you are beneath all the conditioning, all the beliefs, all the stories you've accumulated about who you think you are. This discovery completely transforms the entire spiritual journey, because if the Christ is already the truth of your being, then the path isn't about achieving something in the future or earning something through good behavior. The path becomes simply a process of remembering, of unveiling, of removing the false identifications that obscure the light that's always been shining. Wigglesworth understood that this Christ consciousness isn't confined to Jesus, isn't limited to Christianity, isn't the exclusive property of any tradition or era. It's the eternal selfhood that existed before your birth and will continue long after your body dissolves. But here's where most people get stuck. They hear these words and think, that sounds beautiful, but how do I actually experience this? And that's exactly what we need to explore, not as theory, but as practical reality. Because recognition isn't an intellectual understanding. Recognition is a shift in awareness, a transformation in how you experience your own existence moment to moment. If this resonates with you on a level deeper than just mental understanding, write in the comments, I am ready to recognize, because that readiness itself is already the beginning of the unveiling. Now, here's where we need to address something that might challenge everything you've been taught about the nature of God. And I say this with deep respect for all religious traditions, but this truth is too important to leave unspoken. The God you've been seeking, praying to, hoping will hear your requests, that personal deity sitting somewhere in the heavens deciding who to bless and who to ignore, doesn't actually exist. Not because there's no God, but because God is so much greater, so much more intimate, so much more present than that limited concept could ever capture. When I say God is impersonal, I'm not saying God is distant or cold or uncaring. I'm saying exactly the opposite. God is so completely present, so totally here, that there's no separation, no gap, no distance to bridge. The moment you make God personal, with preferences, with favoritism, with human-like decisions about who deserves what, you create an illusion of separation. You place the divine out there and yourself in here. And suddenly, you're spending your entire life trying to get God's attention, trying to earn divine favor, trying to convince this cosmic parent figure to notice you and help you. But this is the liberation waiting to be discovered. God doesn't act upon you like some external force making decisions about your life. God expresses as you. God doesn't choose for you from a distance. God unfolds through you as the very intelligence and life force that animates your existence. God doesn't send blessings like packages from heaven. God is the blessing, the breath in your lungs, the awareness in your consciousness, the life itself that you are experiencing right now in this very moment. Religion struggled to teach this because the human mind desperately wants to relate to something it can understand, something that thinks like we think, feels like we feel, operates according to human logic and emotion. So we created God in our own image, gave the infinite a personality, turned the omnipresent into a localized being. And while this served a purpose in humanity's development, there comes a point in every sincere seeker's journey where this concept becomes too small, too limiting, too obviously inadequate to capture the reality of what we're actually experiencing. The transformation happens when you stop trying to reach God and start recognizing that the presence you've been seeking is the very consciousness through which you're doing the seeking. It's already here. It's already whole. It's already complete. The Christ within you doesn't need to wake up. It is awake. What needs to shift is your awareness, your recognition of what's already true. This recognition isn't something you force or manufacture through mental effort. It's not about positive thinking or affirming statements or convincing yourself of something. Recognition is a gentle opening, a soft turning of attention from the surface appearance of things to the deeper reality beneath. It's like watching a sunrise. You don't make the sun rise. You simply turn your attention toward it and allow its light to reveal itself to you. Smith Wigglesworth understood this perfectly. He called it recognizing the presence, and he practiced it not with strain or struggle, but with a kind of tender stillness, a quiet allowing, a simple being present to what is already present. Hit that like button if this message touched something real in you. It helps this reach other souls who are searching for exactly what you just found here. This is the shift from seeking to being, from effort to grace, from trying to reach something distant to recognizing what has always been intimate. And when this recognition begins to dawn, even slightly, everything about your experience of life starts to change from the inside out. If you're beginning to sense this shift happening in your own awareness right now, write in the comments, "I see it now," because that seeing itself is the recognition we're talking about. So let's talk about what this actually looks like in practice, because this isn't just philosophy. This is a living approach that transforms how you experience every single moment of your life. And it begins with something incredibly simple yet profoundly powerful. A pause. Not a grand spiritual gesture, not a complicated technique, just a moment of stopping before you react to whatever circumstance is presenting itself. Here's what I mean. The next time fear shows up in your experience, maybe it's financial anxiety, maybe it's worry about health, maybe it's concern about a relationship, before you dive into the familiar pattern of trying to fix it or control it or worry about it, just pause. In that pause, ask yourself a question that has the power to completely shift your entire reality. Who is the I that is aware of this fear? Not as an intellectual exercise, not as a mental puzzle to solve, but as a genuine inquiry into the nature of your own consciousness. This question is like a key that unlocks a door you didn't even know was there. Because here's what happens when you sincerely ask it. Your mind tries to answer and finds that it can't. Your emotions try to respond and discover they have no words. Your body remains silent. And in that space where nothing can answer except awareness itself, something extraordinary begins to reveal itself. You start to notice that the I, which is aware of fear, is not itself afraid. The I that observes lack is not itself lacking. The I that witnesses pain is not itself in pain. This is the separation between the false self and the true self beginning to become visible. And this isn't something you create through effort. It's something you discover was always there, hidden beneath layers of identification with thoughts, feelings, and circumstances. It's like suddenly realizing you've been wearing a costume your entire life, and mistaking the costume for who you actually are. Now, what makes this practice so transformative is that it begins to dissolve what Wigglesworth called personal sense. This deeply ingrained conviction that you are a separate individual entity responsible for managing every aspect of your existence. Personal sense is the belief that you have a private life disconnected from the whole, a private mind generating its own thoughts, private fears and burdens that you must somehow carry and solve on your own. It's the exhausting conviction that you must direct everything, control everything, fix everything, earn everything, protect everything. And here's the hidden truth behind all human suffering. As long as you live from this personal sense of separation, you remain completely outside the natural rhythm and flow of the Christ consciousness. Because the Christ, which is the presence of God expressing as your individual being, operates from a completely different foundation. It needs nothing because it is fullness itself. It fears nothing because it is eternal. It lacks nothing because it is infinite abundance. It seeks nothing because it is already complete. It doesn't struggle or strive because it simply is. It doesn't defend or resist because there's nothing that can threaten what is real. The entire spiritual journey, when you strip away all the complexity, is really about this one fundamental shift. moving from living as the personal sense of self to living as the Christ presence. And this shift doesn't happen through adding something new to your life. It happens through recognizing what was never real in the first place. The separate self you've been defending, protecting, and trying to improve all these years is like a shadow you've been treating as solid. The moment you shine the light of awareness on it, you discover it was never actually there. But this recognition doesn't come from reading about it or intellectually understanding it. It comes through this practice of pausing, inquiring, and allowing the false to dissolve in the light of the true. If you're starting to see how this personal sense has been running your entire life, write in the comments the illusion is breaking, because naming it is part of the process of releasing it. And here's where something truly miraculous begins to happen in your lived experience. When this recognition deepens, when you start to genuinely see through the illusion of the separate self, life doesn't just improve a little bit. Life becomes fundamentally effortless. Not because your external circumstances suddenly become perfect, not because all challenges disappear, but because your entire relationship to existence shifts at the level of identity itself. Wigglesworth understood this with absolute clarity. He taught that the highest spiritual attainment isn't about acquiring some new power or ability. It's simply the end of the personal I, not the destruction of your uniqueness or individuality, but the complete dissolving of the belief that your individuality is somehow separate from God, disconnected from the infinite, operating on its own. And when this belief dissolves, when you begin to live from the recognition that you are the Christ expressing in form, everything changes without you having to change anything. Think about this image for a moment. A wave that knows itself as water can never fear the wind. No matter how the surface appears to be disturbed, no matter how high or low the wave rises, it knows in its essence that it is the ocean itself. Nothing can actually threaten what it truly is. In the same way, when you know yourself as spirit taking temporary form, when you recognize that the eternal consciousness is your actual identity, the world can no longer shake you at the core. You still move through experiences, but you're no longer consumed by them. You respond rather than react. You live from presence rather than from panic. You act from love rather than from fear. This is the transformation that happens naturally, organically, when identity shifts. You're no longer trying to protect and defend and improve a separate self because you've seen through the illusion that there ever was a separate self to protect. Life begins to unfold through you rather than happening to you. Decisions become clear because you're not filtering everything through the lens of personal gain or loss. Relationships transform because you're no longer relating from need or fear. Even your body responds differently because you're no longer holding it in the grip of anxious, controlling energy. Now you might be wondering why this truth, if it's so profound, so liberating, so fundamental, wasn't taught openly for centuries. Why was it passed quietly from teacher to student, hidden in mystical texts, veiled in symbolic language? And the answer reveals something important about the journey of human consciousness itself. This teaching wasn't withheld as some kind of secret reserved for the elite. It was protected because consciousness itself wasn't ready to receive it. Humanity as a whole was living under such deep hypnosis of personal sense, so completely identified with flesh and form, so convinced of separation, that this revelation would have been not just incomprehensible, but threatening. Imagine trying to explain to someone who believes they're drowning that the water is actually their natural element, that they are the water. They would fight you, resist you, because their entire survival mechanism is built on the belief that they're separate from what surrounds them. In the same way, a world convinced of separation cannot easily bear the revelation that separation never actually existed, that it was only ever a belief, a convincing illusion, a dream from which we're now beginning to wake up. So this wisdom lived quietly, passed heart to heart, not as secret knowledge guarded by gatekeepers, but as sacred truth that required a certain ripeness, a readiness, an inner maturity to be received without being distorted or rejected. It required that the seeker had already begun to sense that something was fundamentally wrong with the way they'd been taught to understand themselves and reality. If you're feeling that readiness awakening in you right now, That sense that you're finally prepared to let go of the old identity. Write in the comments, "I'm ready to remember," because that readiness is already the beginning of the transformation. And something extraordinary is happening right now in human consciousness that hasn't happened at this scale before. We're witnessing a collective shift, a global awakening that's making this ancient truth accessible in ways it never has been. Not everywhere, not for everyone, but the momentum is undeniable. Look around at what's happening in the world. The old structures of external authority are crumbling. The fear-based systems that kept people obedient and small are losing their grip. The dogmas that divided humanity into us versus them are being questioned and challenged by millions of people simultaneously. This isn't happening by accident. Human consciousness has reached a tipping point where the pain of living from separation has become greater than the comfort of familiar beliefs. People everywhere are exhausted from trying to find meaning in external achievements, tired of seeking validation from sources outside themselves, weary of the endless striving that never brings lasting peace. The personal sense that humanity has clung to for millennia is cracking under the weight of global transformation, and through those cracks, light is pouring in. Wigglesworth saw this shift beginning even in his own time. He recognized that a new wave of souls was emerging, people who were no longer satisfied with belief systems handed down from authorities, people who wanted direct experience rather than second-hand testimony, people hungry not for more tradition but for living presence, not for rules to follow, but for spiritual freedom to embody. These weren't rebellious souls rejecting the sacred. These were mature consciousness ready to graduate from the kindergarten of religion into the direct knowing that religion was always meant to point toward. And if you're here right now, if you've stayed with me through this entire journey of understanding, you're part of this awakening. You're part of the consciousness that's ready. Because ready souls don't find this teaching by accident. They're drawn to it by something deeper than curiosity. They're called to it by the very presence within them that recognizes itself in these words. Now here's where the ultimate transformation occurs, where everything we've been exploring comes together into one singular realization that changes your entire experience of existence. The moment arrives when you stop seeing yourself as a seeker of God and recognize that you are an expression of God, not symbolically, not as a nice metaphor, but as actual living truth. You are not a separate being trying to reach something distant. You are the divine presence manifesting in form, consciousness experiencing itself through your individual perspective. This shift is so profound that it dissolves the entire framework you've been operating from. You're not a traveler moving along a spiritual path toward some future destination of enlightenment. You are the path itself being walked. You're not a person having a spiritual journey. You are spirit choosing to express itself through the form you call your life. Every breath you take is God breathing. Every thought that arises is consciousness knowing itself. Every action you perform is the infinite expressing through the finite. The I am that you are doesn't need to be reached because it's already here. It doesn't need to be invoked because it's already present. It doesn't need to be earned because it's your fundamental nature. The only thing required is recognition. Simply seeing what has always been true but was overlooked while you were busy identifying with the temporary and forgetting the eternal. And in this recognition, something remarkable unfolds naturally. Life stops being a struggle of personal effort and becomes an unfolding of divine grace. Decisions become clear because you're no longer making them from the limited perspective of what's best for me, but from the infinite wisdom that sees the whole. Actions become effortless because they're no longer driven by the anxiety of a separate self trying to secure its survival, but flow from the presence that knows itself as eternal, complete, and already whole. If this shift is beginning to happen in your awareness right now, write in the comments, "I am the expression," because declaring this opens the door even wider. And this is where the real magic begins to show itself in your everyday lived experience. Because when you start living from this recognition, when your identity shifts from the personal sense of self to the Christ presence, you don't have to manufacture spiritual experiences or force yourself into states of peace and joy. These things arise naturally, organically, as the automatic expression of your true nature revealing itself. You start noticing something subtle at first. There's a quiet joy that begins to bubble up for absolutely no reason, not because something good happened externally, not because you got what you wanted or avoided what you feared, but simply because joy is the natural frequency of consciousness when it's not being obscured by the false sense of separation. It's like clouds parting to reveal the sun that was, always shining behind them. The sun didn't arrive, it was just unveiled. Guidance starts flowing into your life without the exhausting mental gymnastics you used to perform trying to figure everything out. You don't have to analyze every decision to death, weigh every pro and con until you're paralyzed with indecision. Instead, there's a clarity that emerges from a deeper place, an inner knowing that shows you the next step without you having to force it into existence. And somehow, mysteriously, circumstances begin to arrange themselves in ways your personal mind could never have orchestrated or even imagined. Harmony starts appearing in your experience independent of outer conditions. This doesn't mean challenges disappear or that life becomes some kind of perpetual vacation. It means you're no longer thrown off center by the inevitable ups and downs of human existence. You remain anchored in something that doesn't fluctuate with circumstances, something steady beneath the surface. Waves. You find yourself loving people without the strain of trying to be loving, forgiving situations without the struggle of working up forgiveness, trusting life without having to convince yourself to have faith. This isn't self-improvement. This isn't you becoming a better version of yourself through discipline and effort. This is revelation, the uncovering of what you actually are beneath all the conditioning, all the beliefs, all the stories. Life begins to unfold from an inner source of wisdom that knows exactly what it's doing, that's orchestrating everything with intelligence far beyond what your personal mind could comprehend. You're being lived by life itself, sustained by the infinite, guided by the presence that has no confusion about its purpose or direction. And so we arrive at the invitation that has echoed through the ages, spoken by Jesus, embodied by Smith Wigglesworth, whispered by every soul who has awakened to this truth. It's incredibly simple yet contains everything. Abide in the I, rest in the I, live from the I, know the I, let the I live you. Not as a practice you perform occasionally when you remember, but as the natural state you return to again and again until it becomes your default way of being. Because here's the beautiful truth. The moment you do this, even for a single breath, even for one instant of genuine recognition, the Christ stops being an interesting concept you think about and becomes your actual living identity. And from that moment, everything shifts. Life stops being something you have to make happen through sheer force of will and becomes something that unfolds through you as divine grace expressing itself in form. This is the journey behind the journey. This is the teaching beneath all teachings. This is the revelation that was always waiting for you to be ready to receive it. And this is the I am that you have always been, even when you forgot, even when you identified with the costume instead of the one wearing. If this truth is landing in your heart right now as recognition rather than just information, write in the comments, I am home, because that's exactly what this realization feels like, coming home to yourself. So if you've made it all the way to this point, I want you to know something. That's not an accident. You didn't end up here by chance or random algorithm luck. There's something in you that's ready for this shift. Something that recognizes truth when it hears it. Something that's been waiting for permission to stop seeking and start being. And if this resonates with you, if something inside you is saying, yes, this is what I've been looking for, then I'd love for you to subscribe to this channel. Because what we're doing here isn't just sharing information. We're creating a space for consciousness to recognize itself, for souls who are ready to move beyond the surface level of spirituality into the lived experience of what's true. There's so much more we're going to explore together, and I don't want you to miss any of it. Go ahead and hit that like button too, because it tells me this message landed, that the connection we've been building through this entire conversation is real and valuable to you. And more than that, it helps this content reach other people who are exactly where you were when you first clicked on this video, searching for something deeper, ready for something real. I also want to see you in the comments. Right. This message was meant for me because I read every single one, and there's something powerful about declaring your readiness out loud, even if it's just typing it on a screen. It solidifies the recognition, makes it more real, brings it from the realm of thought into expression. And listen, there's a video right here that goes even deeper into living from this Christ consciousness in practical, everyday ways. It complements everything we've covered today perfectly. Click on it and continue with me over there, because this journey we're on together is just getting started, and the next step is already waiting for you.